From the late 1970s through the early 90s, Marvel sold away the movie rights to the majority of its most popular characters in order to avoid bankruptcy and stay afloat. Characters including Spider-Man, the X-Men, the Fantastic Four, Silver Surfer, Daredevil, Hulk, and Iron Man all went to various studios. Marvel tried to put out a few movies based on the characters it still held the rights to, but it didn't go well. Howard the Duck in 1986 was a flop, The Punisher in 1989 was awful, Captain America in 1990 was so bad it went directly to home video, and the Fantastic Four in 1994 wasn't even released. Marvel grew determined to take back its character rights in the decade that followed. The studio that later became Marvel Studios in 1996 was launched in 1993 as Marvel Films originally. They'd put down the movie rights to 10 of their characters as collateral, and in exchange, Merrill Lynch would give them $525 million to make their movies. It was a dangerous gamble. If their movies flopped and they lost money, Ambac Financial, which had insured the deal, would get the movie rights to their characters, and Marvel would be right back in the position they were before it all started. Finding a studio distributor took time. They eventually settled on Paramount, but the bigger problem was what characters to build movies around. The rights to their most popular characters, Spider-Man and the X-Men, were still with other studios after all. Maisel and Arad started regularly clashing over the release rate as well as the strength of their initial lineup of characters. Arad felt Maisel was pushing an unrealistic production schedule, and he had doubts that B and C tier characters like Hulk, Iron Man, and Thor were solid foundations upon which to rest their entire risky venture. By May 2006, Arad was out, leaving Marvel and forming his own production company. After Arad's departure, Maisel was named chairman and Feige was named president of production of Marvel Studios. Feige had a grand vision, a unified, interconnected cinematic universe, where Marvel characters would get their own individual movies before coming together in one big team-up, with all the movies weaving together an interconnected, overarching story.
Listen to the characters I named that we are working on currently, and you put them all together. There's no coincidence that may someday equal the Avengers. I think just having that possibility on the horizon is something that excites all of us.
It was wildly ambitious. It had never been done before, but Feige figured the blueprint was already there in comic books. The roadmap for Marvel Studios would mimic how comic book publishers structured comic book events, with the event itself forming the core and then multiple characters getting tie-in stories in their individual comic book series. The main series would be the Avengers movies, and the tie-ins would be the movies for Iron Man, Thor, and Captain America. But they had to get there first. Iron Man was the first self-financed film on the slate. The character was so third-tier that over 30 screenwriters passed on the job before they found writers willing to pen the script. The director was Jon Favreau, who wasn't exactly known as a big blockbuster guy and whose last film had been a complete flop. The budget was a hefty $140 million, a full quarter of what they had been loaned by Merrill Lynch. Adding to the risk, Favreau had pushed to cast Robert Downey Jr. in the lead role, and the actor came with his own set of baggage. His career had been torpedoed by a drinking and drug problem, landing him in jail.
I'm just not the hero type, clearly, with this laundry list of character defects, all the mistakes I made, largely public.
So nervous was Marvel that he'd self-destruct that they included a stipulation in his contract to hold back 40% of his salary until after production was wrapped and the publicity tour finished, just to make sure he didn't fall off the wagon or implode. He was only a handful of years removed from jail and rehab, of course. The movie turned out to be a great success, obviously. Robert Downey Jr. was the perfect casting choice and a brilliant decision by Favreau and the team. The movie grossed $585 million. They made more money by making the first Iron Man than what Merrill gave them for putting up the rights of the characters as collateral. The success of the film was because of many different aspects, but it was always going to be interesting as to how Marvel, Jon Favreau, and Robert Downey Jr. approached the character in the film. What was it that they wanted the audience to walk away with after the movie? Favreau wanted to make Iron Man a story of an adult man reinventing himself after discovering the world is far more complex than he originally believed. He changed the Vietnam War origin of the character to Afghanistan and fought to cast Robert Downey Jr.
The day I knew everything was going to be okay was the day that Robert Downey Jr. was attached to play Iron Man.
Favreau chose Downey, a fan of the comic, because he felt the actor's past made him an appropriate choice for the part, explaining, "The best and the worst moments of Robert's life have been in the public eye. He had to find an inner balance to overcome obstacles that went far beyond his career. That's Tony Stark." Favreau faced opposition from Marvel in casting Downey, but would not take no for an answer, saying, "It was my job as a director to show that it was the best choice creatively. Everybody knew he was talented, and certainly by studying the Iron Man role and developing that script, I realized that the characters seemed to line up with Robert in all the good and bad ways." Robert Downey was a big risk for the studio and for Favreau himself, as the actor was battling addiction. Prior to Iron Man, Downey was arrested several times on charges related to drugs, which included heroin and cocaine. There was one incident when police stopped him from speeding and found him not only intoxicated, but with heroin and cocaine on him and an unloaded Magnum in his passenger seat. Soon after, he was picked up by police again when he wandered into a neighbor's home and passed out in their son's bedroom. For the next few years, Downey cycled in and out of rehab for addiction in state institutions throughout California. In 1999, he was sentenced to 36 months in state prison, where he spent 12 months serving time before being paroled. He was arrested 2 more times within 8 months before being sent to rehab for 6 months at Wavelengths International. However, Downey made a huge comeback after his time in rehab. His roles in Kiss Kiss Bang Bang and Zodiac helped the actor get his career back on track and attracted the interest of John for the role of Tony Stark in Iron Man. Choosing a character to be the villain of the film was difficult, as Favreau felt Iron Man's arch-nemesis, the Mandarin, would not feel realistic. The Mandarin had originally been envisioned as a rival to Tony Stark with a building of his own right next to Stark Industries, with the Mandarin eventually drilling a hole underneath Stark Industries to steal all of Stark's technology for himself. Instead of going with the Mandarin, they decided to go with Obadiah Stane instead. Favreau wanted the film to be believable by showing the construction of the Iron Man suit in its 3 stages. The Mark I design was intended to look like it was built from spare parts. The back is less armored than the front because Stark would use his resources for a forward attack. It also foreshadows the design of Stane's armor. The Mark II resembles an airplane prototype with visible flaps. The film actually dedicated a lot of time to Tony putting together the suit, which I really appreciated. It actually ends up being an important detail later on for the finale of the movie, with Obadiah pretty much having an earlier version of Tony's suit.
How'd you solve the icing problem?
Icing problem.
This little difference between the two actually shows a lot. Tony constantly testing out the suit and trying to make it perfect, typical of someone with a passion for what they're doing, versus Obadiah just stole the design and clearly doesn't want to improve it at all and didn't improve it, an opportunist, which adds up with everything else that he's done throughout the movie. There was much improvisation in dialogue scenes because the script was not completed when filming began.
We thought the script needed a lot of work. We had 2 weeks of rehearsal and we met together and we really ironed the thing out.
Favreau felt that the improvisation would make the film feel more natural, but Bridges described this approach as a $200 million student film and noted that it caused stress from Marvel executives when the stars were trying to come up with dialogue on the day of filming scenes.
There was no script. The crew would be in there tapping their foot waiting for us, and we'd be in there, playing each other's parts and improvising,
But even after all the improvisation on set, the movie was an amazing success for the brand. Marvel was put on the map and a few years later gets acquired by Disney in 2009 for $4 billion, while Robert Downey Jr. goes on to make around $400 million from playing Tony Stark. We know what to expect when it comes to Marvel now. The Marvel template is very real, and some would argue we know it so well that it's getting boring. But with all that said, this movie set the tone and they didn't even plan it, not only having comedic scenes throughout the movie, but the after-credit scenes, the constant Easter eggs and references in movies, the universe building. But this is all just a coincidence. They bet everything on this movie. If this bombed in the box office, there was no chance the studios would have had the opportunity to make the other movies. But the movie worked flawlessly, setting up sequels for Iron Man, being a template for future Marvel movies, casted the biggest draw in the MCU, and is the genesis of the entire MCU and what Marvel has become. Jon Favreau, Kevin Fiegie, Robert Downey Jr., and everyone involved on this project absolutely killed it. A brand new independent studio bet all it had to finance one movie. A movie that was rejected over 30 times before Jon Favreau came in, with the lead star coming in with a lot of baggage. But it worked. Not only did it set up Marvel as a powerhouse draw in the box office, many other studios attempted to copy the model. Many studios tried, and to be honest, they were all embarrassing attempts. From Sony trying to set up a Sinister Six, to DC setting up the entire Justice League in email attachments. They all made poor decisions and tried to rush into the big movie. The difference was the care in the development. Marvel needed Iron Man to be successful, or they wouldn't be here today.